in an effort at transparency, I would amend the contract that is before us with the following motion. In lieu of a search contract, I move that our Board of Education offer the permanent superintendency position to Verlita White, subject to a committee appointed by the chair negotiating a contract with her and/or any representatives of her.
Second.
Point of order, that's a separate motion. I think we need to vote on this motion.
They already voted on the motion, and the motion failed.
Wasn't that an amendment to
No,
the motion?
that was the motion. Yeah, okay, and there was a second? All right, discussion.
I think that things should be done in a transparent and an open way. I don't believe that there should be some kind of huddle behind closed doors where people say whatever it is they say and then they sort of come out into an open session. We want the light of day to shine into these things. I think this is a board that can express its feelings honestly, openly, and directly. And I think that's a positive thing for us. I originally recommended the current superintendent for this position as interim, and I now believe that given the concerns that my colleagues sincerely raised about doing a national search, I note today's date, April 3rd. I note that the interim superintendent's term actually comes to an end very quickly. In terms of the merits, the substantive merits of the motion, I think that we have a staff, a cadre of teachers, of educational personnel. I think we have principals who really knit our system together. I think they will follow our current superintendent wherever she takes this system. She has identified two key overriding imperatives. One, student behavior, and two, literacy. The behavior in our current times has evolved to the safety of our students and our staff in our schools. How prescient of our superintendent to have identified this as one of her key initiatives. Now is the time for our board to act. I would encourage my colleagues who express, as I say, sincere concern about a recommended contract to instead bring themselves to support a permanent superintendency for our current superintendent, who is a product of our system, who has walked the walk and who has demonstrated a commitment to our system. She has come up through our system. She has been a teacher, a supporting, a resource teacher. She has been an assistant principal in the Essex area. She has been a principal in the Middle River area. We have been able to see the job that she has done and the leadership she has demonstrated for our teachers and our staff. And as I say, they will follow her, in my opinion, wherever she leads. And I believe she's leading us in the right direction with these two key initiatives regarding student behavior, which, as I say, has evolved to a larger matter of safety in our schools, and secondly, with literacy.
Mrs. Henn and then Mrs. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To do justice to Mr. Virch's motion, we need to have discussion of confidential personnel matters that are inappropriate for open session. I would move that we move this motion to discussion in closed session so that those confidential personnel matters can be discussed in an appropriate forum.
All right. Is that? All right, the motion is in effect a motion for executive session. Does that need a second? Is there a second?
You need to have a poll if you're going to be closing this.
All right. Is there a second to the motion?
You need what?
Mr. Hayden seconded the motion. Any discussion on the motion to go into executive session? Yes.
Can you, what, I'm sorry, wait. We're moving into closed session
Executive
session.
Right, which is a closed function
right now
right now.
at 10. Okay.
All right, discussion?
Yes. To the extent we want to be transparent and open, we simply cannot have it both ways. We've already had that very same discussion earlier this evening about attempting to have it both ways. Either we're going to be transparent or we are not going to be transparent. And if we're going to be transparent, then let's have it, let's have the vote, and in fact, let's have the discussion, and then let's have that vote.
Mrs. Causey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm gathering my thoughts from this very shocking motion from you when we have been discussing as a board hiring a search firm to all of a sudden come out with that as a motion, be that as it may. I would remind the board that we have twice now had Maryland Association Boards of Education come to us and speak to us about the appropriate way, the typical way, the almost concrete way that boards of our size do executive searches, and that is to hire a firm to go through the process, one of the most important processes that we have to go through, to guide us through it. It's supposed to include community input, which leads me to another point. We did have community input, a board hearing, and in my opinion, it was quite controversial in that there was a wide variety of opinions. There was not consensus. There was advocates, and there were people that were very concerned. So I don't think it's appropriate for us to take an up and down vote. I think what's appropriate is to do the process that is not just typical, but it's standard. In addition, there's considerable laws related to hiring, advertising ahead of time, opening the position to all potential candidates, that this type of maneuver would specifically limit. So I, for one, would not be voting for your motion because I think we need to have an executive search, one that allows for comprehensive and objective public input. We had a number of concerns raised at the board hearing that there was not a lot of advertising around the time, that initially the time was going to be limited, and then finally at the last minute the time was opened up. And also to the fact that our Maryland Association Boards of Education strongly advised us to hire a search company to do a proper permanent search.
Council advised me that we had given notice of closed session, which was in advance of our open meeting, and we probably would be violating open meeting laws if we attempted to close now to go into executive session.
And, Mr. Chair, I'd like to modify my motion based on that information. I'd like to move this action to the agenda of our April 17th meeting to be discussed in closed session, as it does involve confidential personnel matters. Postpone. Thank you, Ann. To postpone action on this motion to April 17th, not to try to decrease the transparency that Mr. Virch speaks to, but rather to discuss this as it was not an agenda item for this meeting. It needs to be discussed as a full board in closed session.
Mr. Hayden, do you second that? Mr. Hayden seconds your amendment. Now, Mr. Stewart.
So let me offer a few thoughts on the process. I think that we as a board are at an inflection moment. I think that we have been presented here with a contract to engage in a process involving a search firm, and that's at least in part why I think it's reasonable for us to have a discussion about the three options we originally talked about. And as far as process goes, yes, there are requirements as it relates to going through that process, but this is somewhat similar to what Howard County did as far as engaging an interim superintendent and then hiring that person. And as far as feedback goes, we have had weeks and weeks of feedback from various stakeholders on either side. However, we have the benefit of hearing from Teachers of the Year. We have the benefit of hearing from CASE and surveys and 85% support from Ms. White. We have the benefit of a town hall discussion with our stakeholders. We have the benefit of having worked with Ms. White and knowing how she interacts with this board, which, you know, I can just say it, we're not the easiest of boards to work with. And indeed, we engaged in a process unlike any other twice in the last just couple of months The last one involving, I think, over now 300 questions, 9 to 10 hours of public discussion, along with a slew of emails, as we all know, involved in the process. She has been nothing but, and her team has been nothing but accommodating and also trying to make us our better selves, maybe despite our best efforts. But we are working as hard as we can, I think, for our kids, and we are being supported in a terrific way by Ms. White and her team. And I think that it, for us, is, at least for me, is the kind of on-the-job review and understanding that I needed to know that she is the right person at the right time for our system.
Ms. Henn and then Ms. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have not engaged in a formal public input process for this decision, the most important decision that this board will make. Yes, we've heard from stakeholders. We've heard mixed opinions on this decision from the public. We learned a lot, Mr. Stewart, about this process and what a public input process could look like by reviewing the proposals by these two search firms, how they would go about collecting public input through multiple venues, through a formalized search or formalized input process, through online surveys, through town halls. We have done none of that. It would be irresponsible to move forward with this decision and disregard public feedback in a formalized way. We owe it to the public, we owe it to ourselves as a board to do our due diligence. Maybe the outcome will be the same, but at least we will restore public confidence that this board cares.
Mrs. Miller.
Thank you. We had 16 months to consider a permanent superintendent, and we're now down to the last, 8 to 11 weeks. Before someone would actually have to be seated, that's 11 weeks. And now we decide we're not going to even conduct a search. We're just going to give up on that. And that really lends a lot of credence to the op-ed that I wrote on March 5th, saying that I believe this board, the majority of this board, is trying to shoehorn us into one candidate with no other options. Essentially, a no-bid contract for our next superintendent. We have talked since last year that the next board should really decide this decision.
That's not true.
And it makes sense that, if we received a bunch of applications, we would naturally weed out ones that have ethical violations. We should exclude from consideration anyone with ethical violations. Ms. White has 2 for financial non-disclosure and use of prestige in office. We have not had any public input on this decision. As a matter of fact, the one public hearing we had, it was intentionally stated that it was not to discuss Ms. White. So we've not had any. So if you're talking about transparency and inclusion of the public, this is not the way to go about it. We shouldn't be making this decision tonight. We can have this discussion, but we should definitely postpone this and have a public input hearing to actually discuss this issue.
All right, further comment on the motion to postpone until, or move this till the 17th. Mr. McDaniels and then Mr. Virch.
I would like to start by saying that I certainly believe that Ms. White is an extremely viable candidate for the permanent superintendent position. I do believe, though, whomever we select as superintendent will start with a stronger foundation if the process that we use is believed to be transparent and open. And I came to this meeting believing that part of the process would be to have a search firm participate in the process. Personally, I expected the outcome perhaps to even separate whatever candidate we had further from the rest of the field. I don't think that would limit the opportunities of the interim superintendent in any way. I think in my mind, it would strengthen it. And I cannot make myself vote against her, but at the same time, I cannot support a process that doesn't appear to be transparent. And I do believe not acting on the search firm tonight begins to paint ourselves in a corner, because we're already under limited time constraints, and to further delay that would really make a problem for whoever we select. So I believe that I will abstain from any vote this evening, but it's no indication of my personal support for Ms. White.
Mr. Verch.
Just two quick observations. To the extent that my colleagues made sincere observations with regard to their reluctance to engage the firm, the search firm that the Building and Contracts Committee had brought forward, and to the extent that the alternative was not a search firm that was found to be acceptable to the board, then this becomes an exercise that doesn't seem to have a place to go in the time that's available. And to the extent we have a superintendent on the job with this record of devotion to our system, as Mr. Stewart acknowledged, this is an inflection moment, and it's an opportunity for the board to move forward on a night when it has made a momentous decision for the future of our system already. I think my colleagues know how to make decisions that carry this weight, and I think tonight's the night to do it during this moment of inflection, and I intend to support my motion.
Ms. Causey and then Mr. Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I would point out that in the vote to amend, or in the vote to approve BWP, there were only 4 votes for it, which would indicate that there were 8 other votes that would be available for Hazard. And I would also state that I did not say that I would not vote for Hazard, but I stated that I would rather have BWP. But I fully intended to vote for Hazard as supporting what's necessary for this board to do, which is to do a full permanent search with advisors. So I would suggest that we reject Mr. Verch's motion and that we have a motion then to accept Hazard and to start the search that this system needs.
Mr. Stewart.
So as to, again, the issue of process, I think it would be, a disservice to say to the many, many people who spoke to us, whether it's via email, perhaps even hundreds at this point, comments that were submitted during the town hall electronic comments, the town hall comments themselves, the people who have come before us to speak. I think it would say we'd be doing them a disservice if we said that their input didn't matter because we didn't flip a switch and say, now we're going to start listening to you. I've been listening all along the way, and it's mattered to me. And I don't think that the Howard County superintendent suffered greatly because they went through a process that maybe didn't drag on for 9 or 10 or 12 months at a time. I think that, in fact, quite the opposite, that individual gained momentum and credibility to continue to deliver results and to get going with the important work that we have to do as a board. We have rare moments, I think, in this life and in the service for our kids to select somebody who has met them at their level, who has been where they have been where our administrators have been where our teachers have been. This is a unique moment in time, and to abdicate that responsibility, knowing that there will be a time of great upheaval with an election, with a brand new board coming in, to subject our kids to that kind of environment, I think would be a disservice. And instead, we have this opportunity to act and to execute our duty for the benefit of our kids and for those who are least among us, who I think should be primary in our hearts, and I think are for Ms. White and her team.
Mr. Uhlfelder.
You know, if any one of us on a board here can honestly say they do not know what the public wants at this point, which can be no different from what each of us want. You know, we want a school system that performs. Now, I don't need anybody from the public to try and tell me the difference between what I know is good performance and what isn't. And if any member of this board has not worked long enough or has not worked with Ms. White since last July 1st and don't have an opinion now of whether she can or cannot move us in the right direction, I don't see why we have to listen to more public comments when we already know what it takes. And one other thing, the selection of a person from within without going to the public is not uncommon. If you read your daily things, a couple months ago, there were 2 other districts, one in Ohio and one someplace else, that moved in that direction without going to a public search. So it's not uncommon.
Ms. Schaefer.
I agree with Mr. McDaniels. I think I will be abstaining as well. I guess I didn't really expect this at 10:30 at night. But I appreciate everything Ms. White has done for our system, but I kind of want to hear from more students before we go ahead on anything. We had a public hearing, only 2 students spoke, and I think if we're picking a superintendent, we should hear from the kids who are under the superintendent. So yes, I will be abstaining.
Further questions, comments, discussion? The motion is to postpone the meeting until April 17. I'm sorry, to postpone the motion until the April 17 meeting.
I'm able to do that. I would agree to that.
All right, all in favor of postponing the, Mrs. Causey?
Excuse me. I just want, first of all, I think it's incredibly unprofessional for Mr. Virch to even put this sort of motion forward, as Josie said, at 10:30 at night, when this was not on the agenda. What was on the agenda was a permanent search. And for others to say that we know what the system wants is ridiculous. The one hearing that we did have, there was not consensus, there was controversy. So I don't know what board hearing you all attended, but there was controversy. And I don't believe that delaying it to the next week is the right idea. I think this board needs to do what is right. We have Maryland Association Boards of Education that works with every single district in this state for decades. And they have advised us twice that it would be, that no one does not use a permanent search in very rare cases. And in this case, we do not have consensus. So I would like the vote to go forward that we are rejecting your motion and then move forward on selecting the permanent search company that appeals to most of the board members, which would be Hazard.
Okay, so the motion on the floor is to postpone the vote on the motion made by Mr. Virch until April 17. Are we ready to vote on that?
No, one